In today's episode, we're diving into the terrifying reality of animals invading cities. From a 27-year-old runner ambushed by a cougar on a foggy trail near Seattle, to a 4-year-old boy mauled in his Houston backyard by a rabid coyote that slipped through a fence. Let's begin with the first story. It was January 17, 2016, when Kavita Sharma tucked a stray lock of her hair beneath her cap and stepped into the fluorescent-lit corridors of Sassoon General Hospital. She had always been the kind of person who moved quietly but left spaces warmer in her wake. At 32, Kavita was a mother of two, a wife, and a nurse who knew the art of calming frightened children with a single glance. Her colleagues joked that she carried sunshine in her pocket, even during the longest nights. But this morning felt different. The air was unusually heavy, the January mist curling thick around the hospital's edges, blurring shapes that should have been familiar. Somewhere in the back of her mind, a vague unease stirred. Something about unfinished repairs on the garden wall, something about the growing wildness beyond the hospital's gates. But Kavita pushed the thoughts aside. There were always more urgent worries. An IV line that needed changing, a child who needed soothing. Her night shift had been relentless. 3 pediatric admissions, all severe respiratory cases, kept her weaving between beds without rest. 8 hours passed in a blur of soft-spoken reassurances and careful adjustments. She thought of Priya's art project she was missing, of Arjun's soccer game she had promised to attend that afternoon. If she could just get through the morning, she told herself, she'd make it home in time to hug them both before school. At 5:58 a.m., Kavita clutched her battered stainless steel tumbler and pushed open the rear garden door, grateful for the few minutes she reserved each day to breathe outside hospital walls. The garden had always been a small oasis, 30 feet by 40 feet, framed by 3 sides of a hospital and a high concrete wall on the 4th. Neem trees arched overhead, their leaves dark against the gray sky, and the faint scent of damp earth hung heavy in the misty air. Today, the garden seemed too still. The mist swallowed the far end of the courtyard, gravel crunched loudly under her shoes, louder than it should have. The cracked section of the wall, hidden behind overgrown shrubs, went unnoticed once again. Budget cuts had delayed its repair for months. Everyone knew about it, no one thought it mattered. What Kavita didn't see was the figure crouched low in the tangled green. A young male leopard, about 4 years old and weighing 130 pounds, had slipped through the broken section hours earlier, seeking escape from the sprawling chaos of construction and broken wildlands that had once been his home. Now trapped within concrete and fear, the animal hid, every muscle coiled tight. Kavita made her way toward her usual bench beneath the neem tree, her thoughts already drifting to the breakfast she would share with her children. She never saw the movement until it was too late. From just 12 feet away, the leopard exploded from the shadows. In a flash of golden fur and raw muscle, it closed the distance. Her tea tumbler clattered onto the gravel as jaws clamped down around her neck with brutal force. There was no time to cry out. The puncture was devastating, 2-inch canines severing arteries with a precision honed by instinct. Kavita collapsed instantly, her lifeblood soaking into the earth where the first sunlight should have touched. 2 hospital orderlies stepping into the courtyard for their own break heard the crash. Shouts rang out. Grabbing maintenance poles from nearby, they charged with desperate courage. Startled by the sudden noise, the leopard released its hold and disappeared over the broken wall, melting into the mist. Inside the hospital, Kavita's colleagues fought fiercely to save her. She was rushed to the trauma center, just 100 yards from the garden she had crossed so many times before. But the blood loss was too great. At 6:27 a.m., Kavita Sharma was pronounced dead. The grief struck like a wave. Wildlife officials captured and tranquilized the leopard 2 days later, finding it roaming disoriented along a half-finished construction site. Public outrage boiled over. How had the wall been left unrepaired? How had warnings gone unanswered? In the aftermath, Pune's municipal leaders passed new ordinances requiring wildlife corridor protections, mandatory maintenance checks, and emergency funding for perimeter security in urban hospitals. But for those who knew Kavita, the regulations arrived too late. Her absence left a hollow space not just in the pediatric ward she had graced, but in the small kitchen where Priya and Arjun waited each morning for a mother who would never walk through the door again. November 17, 2008. The bustling streets of Addis Ababa, Ethiopia fell quiet as night descended upon the city. The capital's outskirts, where industrial zones meet residential areas, are typically deserted after dark except for the occasional security guard making their rounds. The area was dotted with poorly regulated facilities, including an illegal exotic animal compound that would soon become the epicenter of tragedy. Rahim Gebrselassie, a 37-year-old security guard, had been working at a warehouse complex for nearly 3 years. A father of 2 with a reputation for reliability, Rahim had taken the night shift to earn extra money for his family. The job was usually uneventful, checking locks, monitoring for trespassers, and making hourly rounds through the dimly lit alleys between buildings. That night, however, something was different. Several stray dogs in the area were unusually agitated, barking incessantly at the shadows. Unknown to Rahim, a male lion had escaped from a nearby illegal exotic animal facility earlier that evening. The owner had been collecting dangerous animals for years, housing them in substandard conditions with inadequate security measures. A combination of poor enclosure design and negligent supervision had allowed the predator to slip away unnoticed. African lions are apex predators, weighing between 330 and 420 pounds, with powerful muscles designed for taking down large prey. In their natural habitat, they hunt primarily at dawn, dusk, and night, relying on stealth rather than speed for most of their approach. The escaped lion, likely stressed and disoriented in the unfamiliar urban environment, had been moving through the shadows, following the paths of least resistance. Drainage ditches, alleyways, and vacant lots. At approximately 2:15 in the morning, Rahim was making his routine patrol near the back of the warehouse complex. He carried only a flashlight and a radio as he walked between 2 large storage buildings. The narrow passage was poorly lit with several dumpsters creating areas of complete darkness. As Rahim approached one such area, his flashlight beam briefly caught a reflection of eyes in the darkness. The attack happened without warning. The lion charged from approximately 15 feet away, a distance it covered in less than a second. The initial impact knocked Rahim to the ground, his flashlight skittering across the pavement. The lion, following instinctual hunting behavior, immediately targeted Rahim's neck and face, a technique evolved to quickly immobilize prey by cutting off air supply rather than causing immediate blood loss. Rahim's cries for help echoed briefly through the complex. A night watchman in a building across the street later reported hearing shouts followed by what he described as terrible sounds, but was too frightened to investigate or even look out his window. The entire attack likely lasted less than a minute. The lion's powerful jaws closed around Rahim's neck, cutting off his airway. Death would have come relatively quickly from asphyxiation, with unconsciousness occurring within 10 to 20 seconds. After Rahim was no longer moving, the lion dragged his body a short distance behind one of the dumpsters, a natural behavior to move prey away from the open and into a more secluded location. Evidence at the scene suggested the lion remained with the body for several hours before moving on. Though feeding was minimal, another indication of the predator's disoriented state in the unfamiliar environment. Rahim's body was discovered at 5:45 in the morning by another security guard arriving for the morning shift. Authorities were immediately called and police secured the area. Local wildlife officials and police officers conducted a careful search of the surrounding neighborhood, eventually locating the lion in an abandoned construction site approximately 400 meters from the attack location. Given the urban setting and immediate danger to the public, officials made the decision to euthanize the animal rather than attempt capture. A police marksman dispatched the lion with a single shot. The subsequent investigation confirmed it had escaped from an illegal exotic animal facility owned by a local businessman with connections to wildlife trafficking. The facility owner was arrested and faced multiple charges, including criminal negligence resulting in death and illegal possession of protected wildlife. He was eventually sentenced to 8 years in prison, though many in the community felt the punishment was insufficient given the preventable nature of the tragedy. Rahim's family struggled in the aftermath. While they received some compensation through the court, the loss of the family's primary provider created lasting hardship. His widow eventually relocated with their children to live with relatives in another part of the city. The incident prompted a brief period of increased enforcement of wildlife regulations in Addis Ababa, though critics noted that systemic issues and oversight remained largely unaddressed. The tragic death of Rahim Gabrielasi serves as a stark reminder of the dangers that can emerge when wild predators enter human spaces through negligence and illegal activity. Yet his story would not be the last of its kind. Just months later in northern India, forest ranger Vikram Singh would encounter a similar fate while investigating reports of a tiger near the edge of a national park. The predator's unusual behavior would raise questions about the increasing conflicts between humans and wildlife in rapidly developing regions. February 22, 2013 was bitterly cold in Bogorodskoye, Russia, with temperatures plummeting to -35°C as darkness fell over the remote village. The air was so cold that each breath formed a dense cloud of vapor, and the snow crunched loudly underfoot. The village itself was quiet, with most residents having retreated to the warmth of their homes hours earlier, leaving the streets deserted except for occasional wisps of smoke rising from chimneys. Denis Velkov was a 42-year-old mechanic who had lived in Bogorodskoye his entire life. Stocky and strong from years of physical labor with a thick beard that helped protect his face from the bitter cold, Denis was known throughout the village as someone who could fix almost anything with an engine. February 2013 had been particularly harsh, with heavy snowfall and dropping temperatures. Food was becoming scarce, not only for the villagers but also for the wildlife in the surrounding forests. Wolves, which normally avoid human settlements, had been spotted increasingly close to the village, drawn by the scent of livestock and garbage. Several residents had reported seeing wolf tracks circling their properties, and a few had heard howling uncontrollably close to their homes at night. On that fateful evening, Denis had stayed late at his workshop. By the time he completed the work, it was already midnight. The village had turned quiet. Denis bundled up for the walk home. He carried a small flashlight, though the full moon reflected brightly off the snow. The road leading from the village to his house was rarely used in winter. Denis walked briskly. The only sounds were the crunch of his boots on the packed snow and the occasional distant crack of a tree branch breaking under the weight of ice. About halfway home, Denis paused. Something felt wrong. The night had become too quiet, with even the usual whisper of wind through the trees suddenly absent. Denis quickened his pace, focused entirely on reaching the safety of his home. He was less than a kilometer away when suddenly a gray wolf appeared, emerging from the trees to his right. Eurasian gray wolves, the species native to Russia, are among the largest wolf subspecies, with males weighing up to 175 pounds and standing nearly a meter tall at the shoulder. Their thick winter coats with dense underfur and long guard hairs give them a much larger appearance in the cold months and allow them to survive in low temperatures. Wolves generally avoid humans, but something about this wolf's behavior, the direct approach, the lack of caution, this encounter is different. As Denise stood motionless, more wolves emerged from the forest, a hunting pack driven by hunger to take unusual risks. They formed a loose semicircle around him, cutting off his path home. The lead wolf lunged forward, but rather than going directly for Denise's throat, as might happen in fiction, it targeted his leg, attempting to hamstring him and bring him down. This is the standard hunting technique used by wolves against large prey like moose and elk. They attack the legs first to immobilize the animal before delivering fatal bites to more vulnerable areas. Another wolf darted in from the side, clamping its jaws around Denise's arm. The thick layers of his winter clothing prevented the teeth from immediately reaching flesh, but the force of the bite was still agonizing. A wolf's jaw can exert up to 1,500 pounds of pressure per square inch, enough to crush bone and tear through heavy clothing with ease. Denis fought desperately against the wolves as they circled and lunged. He was outnumbered and in an impossible position. Within minutes, his strength began to wane, and the wolves sensed his weakening. Wolves are incredibly intelligent predators with remarkable stamina. They can maintain pursuits for hours, wearing down prey through exhaustion rather than speed alone. Wolf attacks on humans are extremely rare, but when they do occur, they follow the same pattern used against natural prey species. Denis slipped on the trampled icy snow. Only after he was down did the lead wolf approach his neck and throat, the killing technique that would end the struggle. The pain was excruciating, but Denis continued to fight even as he felt the other wolves tearing at his legs and side. But even putting up a fight, Denis was defeated. The next morning, a villager named Mikhail Sokolov was traveling the same road on his way to ask Denis about repairs to his generator. From a distance, he noticed something dark against the white snow. As he approached, the ravens that had been circling took flight, revealing the gruesome scene below. Ravens and wolves have a complex relationship in the wild. The birds often follow wolf packs scavenging from their kills, and have even been observed playing with wolf pups. Denis' body lay in the center of the path, surrounded by a wide circle of blood-stained snow and clear evidence of a violent struggle. Mikhail crossed himself and quickly returned to the village to alert the authorities. By noon, a group of men had recovered Denis' body and brought it back to the village. Wildlife experts who investigated the incident concluded that the unusually harsh winter had reduced the wolves' natural prey population, had created the perfect conditions for such an attack. While wolf attacks on humans are extremely rare, with only a handful of documented fatal attacks in Russia over the past century, they become more likely when wolves are starving and desperate. It was September 12, 2008 when Ashley Rowan laced up her blue running shoes in the dim light of her Bellevue, Washington apartment, unaware it would be the last quiet morning she would ever know. At 27, Ashley had built a careful, hopeful life in a city still wrapped in mist and promise. A graphic designer by trade, she had left behind the noise of Phoenix for a remote job with a tech startup in the dream of living closer to the towering evergreens and cool open trails of the Pacific Northwest. The move had been her reset, an attempt to trade desert heat and endless highways for mountain air and solitude. Running quickly became her ritual, a way to manage stress, soothe the quiet ache of loneliness, and recenter after long days staring into glowing screens. Her preferred routes were the wooded ones, winding trails where she rarely saw another soul before sunrise. The stillness didn't unsettle her, if anything, it reassured her. She liked the feeling of being alone and in control, with only the rhythm of her breath and the thump of her shoes to anchor her. The morning air clung heavy with fog, visibility shrinking to about 30 feet. Fine mist settled in Ashley's auburn hair as she stretched outside her apartment, the yellow flash of her running jacket a bold stroke against the graying landscape. She tapped through her phone to cue up her usual playlist, smiling faintly at the familiar songs. As music filled her headphones, she stepped into the chill, pulled her sleeves tighter, and set off. At 6:28 a.m., her fitness tracker logged her entrance into Bridle Trail State Park, a place she had come to love for its narrow dirt paths, dense pines, and early morning emptiness. The mist twisted itself between trees like a living thing. The only sounds were her footsteps against the damp soil and the muffled beat in her ears. She passed a trailhead sign she had seen dozens of times before. It warned hikers to avoid leaving food out, to keep dogs leashed, and to be aware of potential wildlife. Bears, coyotes, and cougars. Ashley barely noticed. The signs were always there. She had come to think of them as routine legal disclaimers meant for campers, not people like her. Early risers, careful, predictable. What Ashley didn't know, what those signs never quite conveyed, was that a full-grown mountain lion could leap over 30 feet in a single bound and stalk prey for miles without making a sound. Known also as cougars or pumas, these powerful predators are solitary, territorial hunters capable of killing animals much larger than themselves. Males can reach 8 feet from nose to tail and weigh over 150 pounds. They hunt by stealth, remaining hidden until the very last second. In wilderness areas, they avoid humans, but when their territory is fractured and food becomes scarce, their behavior shifts. A desperate cougar stops making good choices. For weeks, residents had been filing reports about a large cat spotted slipping through the eastern trails of Bridle Trails Park. Most sightings came at dusk, quick glimpses near driveways or trails, sometimes within view of fenced yards. Wildlife officials investigated but found no direct threat. Without confirmed aggression, they posted small paper warnings on kiosks at trail entrances. No closures, no alerts, just a quiet hint to be cautious. As Ashley reached the 1-mile mark, the cougar was already watching her. It had been tracking her since she entered the park, pacing through the tree line under cover of fog. Now resting atop a fallen log, the cat crouched low and still, amber eyes fixed on her moving form. The wind was in its favor, hunger gnawed at its ribs. At roughly 120 pounds, the young male was underweight and displaced, pushed from its range by nearby construction, and left to hunt in territory it barely understood. Deer had grown scarce. Dogs and garbage had become regular targets. Now it was watching something bigger. Without a sound, the cougar dropped from its perch and melted into the underbrush, moving parallel to the trail. Its paws, wide and padded, left almost no trace on the damp ground. Ashley jogged on unaware, her breathing steady. Her music kept playing, the trees closed in. At 6:52 a.m., she reached a shallow gully, a low point in the trail where visibility narrowed and the slope dipped. There were no houses here, no nearby roads, just a hollowed-out basin surrounded by brush and silent trunks. The cougar made its decision. In a blur of muscle and speed, it lunged from the undergrowth, 15 feet in a single bound. Its full weight slammed into Ashley's back, driving her face first into the trail. Her headphones flew off, the music cutting the silence as her body hit the mud. She barely had time to react before the cougar's jaws locked onto the back of her neck. Ashley fought with blind, instinctive panic. She clawed at the soil, her legs kicking wildly behind her. Her fitness tracker spiked, 145 to over 200 beats per minute in seconds, before the screen cracked and the data froze. The cougar raked its claws across her torso, shredding her jacket, tearing through skin and fabric alike. For nearly 3 minutes, she struggled against the crushing weight. As her movement slowed and her strength gave way, the cat began dragging her away from the trail deeper into the gully toward the cover of a dense thicket. The drag marks would later measure 27 feet, a muddy trail carved through the undergrowth to where the cougar began its attempt to cache the body beneath leaves and debris. When Ashley failed to show up for work that morning, her colleagues initially assumed she had overslept. By noon, missed calls turned into group text and unanswered voicemails. By 2 p.m., one of her co-workers filed a missing persons report. A search party began sweeping the trails by late afternoon, but darkness and fog slowed progress. It wasn't until dawn the following day that they found her. Her body, partially concealed under a layer of ferns and pine needles, showed clear signs of a cougar kill, bite wounds to the neck and back, drag marks, and the distinctive caching behavior seen in wild feline predation. Her watch had stopped at 6:56 a.m. Wildlife officers tracked the young male 2 days later, locating it near a creek where it had been scavenging on small animals. It weighed just 118 pounds, dangerously underweight for its age. Officials made the decision to euthanize it on site. Necropsy results confirmed the animal had not eaten properly in weeks. Its stomach was nearly empty. With no other viable prey, it had taken a desperate risk and found an unprotected target. Bridle Trail State Park closed temporarily as officials introduced stricter wildlife monitoring protocols, removed trailhead signage in favor of bold posted warnings, and began a new campaign aimed at educating joggers and early morning trail users. Ashley had loved the quiet, but in the end, it was the silence that betrayed her. June 17, 2011. The outskirts of Johannesburg, South Africa were shrouded in darkness. The Soweto township, with its densely packed homes and narrow streets, was just beginning to stir. Drought had plagued the region for months, turning the once lush landscape into parched earth. Extensive deforestation near Krugersdorp had devastated natural habitats, pushing desperate wildlife closer to human settlements than ever before. Malcolm Tuani, a 52-year-old taxi driver, was returning home after a grueling 12-hour night shift. A respected figure in his community, Malcolm had driven taxis for over 20 years, navigating the complex streets of Johannesburg with an expertise that earned him loyal customers. His eldest son had just started university, a source of immense pride for Malcolm, who had sacrificed much to provide educational opportunities for his children. That fateful morning, he parked his white Toyota sedan on the street as usual, just 50 meters from his modest brick home. The streetlights cast elongated shadows as he gathered his belongings and began the short walk to his gate. Unknown to Malcolm, the environmental pressures had pushed a leopard into the urban edges of Johannesburg. Leopards, highly adaptable and naturally nocturnal, had begun targeting stray dogs and goats in the township. Several residents had reported missing pets and unusual sounds in the night, but authorities had dismissed these as routine urban problems rather than signs of a dangerous predator. Leopards are Africa's most adaptable big cats, capable of surviving in diverse environments from mountains to urban fringes. Unlike lions, they hunt alone and rely on stealth rather than speed. A fully grown male leopard typically weighs between 60 and 70 kilograms and possesses jaw strength powerful enough to drag prey twice its own weight up into trees. Their rosette-spotted coats provide excellent camouflage, allowing them to disappear against dappled light and shadow, even in urban environments where walls and drainage ditches offer hiding places. As Malcolm approached his gate at approximately 4:30 in the morning, the leopard was crouched behind a low concrete wall adjacent to his property. When Malcolm passed within striking distance, the leopard launched itself at him. The attack was silent and lightning fast, giving Malcolm no chance to react or defend himself. The leopard's jaws clamped onto Malcolm's neck, its canines puncturing vital blood vessels. The bite delivered approximately 300 to 500 pounds of pressure per square inch, causing immediate and severe damage. Malcolm had no time to call for help as the leopard's weight drove him into the ground. His body slammed against the dirt road, the impact causing severe additional trauma. The leopard's front claws dug into Malcolm's shoulder for stability, penetrating through his jacket. Neighbors heard the commotion but mistook the sounds for a robbery, a common occurrence in the area. No one ventured outside to investigate. The leopard maintained its grip on Malcolm's neck, ensuring its prey was immobilized. Blood pooled beneath Malcolm's body as the predator began to drag him toward a nearby drainage ditch, following the instinctive behavior to secure its kill. The leopard's claws tore through Malcolm's clothing and lacerated his back as it dragged him approximately 15 meters across the rough terrain. By this point, Malcolm had lost consciousness from blood loss and trauma. His body was limp as the leopard attempted to pull him into the narrow concrete drainage channel. A passing delivery truck's headlights illuminated the scene, startling the leopard and causing it to retreat into the shadows. The driver spotted Malcolm's body and immediately alerted authorities. But by the time emergency services arrived, Malcolm had already died from blood loss and traumatic injuries. The official time of death was recorded as 4:47 in the morning. In the aftermath, wildlife authorities launched a search for the leopard, setting traps throughout the township. 3 days later, they captured a male leopard approximately 2 kilometers from the attack site. DNA testing confirmed it was responsible for Malcolm's death. The incident sparked concern in the community and raised questions about urban wildlife management during environmental crises. Malcolm's family received compensation from the local government, though they claimed that officials had ignored previous warnings about predator sightings in residential areas. June 9, 2015 was a sweltering day in Miami, Florida, with temperatures climbing into the high 90s and humidity that made the air feel thick and oppressive. As night fell, the temperature remained uncomfortably warm, prompting many residents to crank up their air conditioning units to find relief from the tropical climate. Eliza Carradine was a 29-year-old graphic designer who had moved to Miami 2 years earlier, drawn by the city's creative energy and year-round sunshine. Eliza loved bright colors, covering her apartment with indoor plants, and reading books at night. With her bright smile and easygoing personality, she had quickly made friends in her apartment building and around the neighborhood. Living alone in a modest one-bedroom apartment in Little Havana, Eliza had created a cozy space filled with plants, artwork, and books. She had recently been promoted to senior designer and was excited about the new responsibilities and creative challenges that came with the position. That particular day had been especially exhausting for Eliza. After grabbing food, she returned to her apartment, looking forward to a quiet evening of relaxation. After dinner, Eliza took a long shower, changed into her comfortable pajamas, and settled into bed. The summer heat had prompted her to turn up the air conditioning. She began to drift off to sleep. What Eliza didn't know was that her upstairs neighbor had been illegally keeping exotic pets in his apartment for years. Among his collection was a 16-foot Burmese python that he raised in secret, against both building regulations and Florida state law. That night, the massive snake had managed to escape its inadequately secured enclosure. It had slithered out of the neighbor's apartment through his partially open balcony door. The python then descended to the level below by using the building's exterior, its powerful muscles allowing it to navigate the short distance between floors. Burmese pythons are excellent climbers, using their muscular bodies and rough scales to grip surfaces and move vertically with surprising agility. Due to the excess of heat, even with the AC on, Eliza left her balcony door open for fresh air to circulate in, providing the perfect entry point for the predator. Burmese pythons are among the largest snake species in the world, capable of growing over 20 feet long and weighing more than 200 pounds. Native to Southeast Asia, these powerful constrictors are ambush predators, using their excellent sense of smell to locate prey and their incredible strength to squeeze the life from their victims. As Eliza slept peacefully in her bed, the python silently entered through the balcony door and began to explore this new environment. Pythons have heat-sensing pits along their jaws that allow them to detect the body heat of potential prey even in complete darkness. Though not a typical predator to humans, pythons are opportunistic, especially when hunger and heat combine. Drawn by the warmth of Eliza's body, the python slowly approached the bed. Eliza stirred in her sleep. This slight movement was enough to trigger the python's predatory instinct. In one fluid motion, the massive reptile struck, wrapping its muscular coils around Eliza's torso and beginning to constrict. Contrary to popular belief, pythons don't crush their prey or break bones. Instead, they prevent breathing by tightening their coils each time the victim exhales, making it impossible to draw the next breath. Eliza's eyes opened in terror as she felt the crushing pressure around her chest. She tried to scream, but the python's grip had already begun to restrict her ability to draw breath. With her arms pinned to her sides, she thrashed desperately. The python responded to her struggles by tightening its grip further. Each time Eliza exhaled, the snake constricted more, preventing her from taking in a full breath. With each passing second, Eliza's movements became weaker as oxygen deprivation began to affect her brain. In her final moments of consciousness, Eliza managed to kick her legs forcefully enough to knock several books from the shelf, creating a loud thump. Her neighbor in the adjacent apartment, who had been having trouble sleeping, heard the commotion and the loud thump. Concerned, the neighbor knocked on Eliza's door. Receiving no response, she alerted the building's landlord, who had a master key. By the time they entered the apartment, it was already too late. They found Eliza's lifeless body on the floor beside her bed, still partially wrapped in the python's coils. The landlord immediately called 911 and police and animal control officers arrived within minutes. The python was captured and later euthanized for testing. The neighbor was arrested and charged with multiple offenses, including manslaughter, illegal possession of exotic animals, and violation of Florida's wildlife laws. He eventually received a 7-year prison sentence. It was April 15, 2015, when Eleanor Whitgrove, 84 years old, woke up in her cabin on the edge of Pisgah National Forest, unaware that it would be the last time she would watch the morning mist curl over the Blue Ridge Mountains. For nearly 40 years, this small patch of land had been her world, a quiet place where the comforts of home met the unpredictable wild. Eleanor had built a life here after her husband's passing nearly 4 decades earlier, choosing the silence of the forest over the noise and pace of the city. She had once been a schoolteacher, structured, empathetic, and meticulous. After retirement and widowhood converged, the days stretched long. With no children nearby and few close neighbors, the isolation deepened. But the animals gave her a rhythm. It started with birds, placing seed trays on the railing, watching chickadees and mourning doves pick through the mix. Then came the squirrels, which she began tossing nuts to, and the deer, who quickly learned to wander close when the scent of sliced apples drifted across the yard. Eventually, she began preparing dedicated food scraps each morning: oatmeal with honey, vegetable peels, old bread, fruit cores, always arranged in a shallow metal bowl placed on a stone slab near the tree line. It gave her purpose, something to wake up for, something to look after. She told neighbors the animals were her company. She gave names to some of the regulars: 2 raccoons she called the twins, a lame doe she recognized by her halting step. She spoke about them with the same warmth she once reserved for her 3rd-grade students. To Eleanor, this wasn't just feeding wildlife, it was caretaking. It was structure, it was routine, it was proof that something still relied on her. Even the bears, which she rarely saw up close, became part of the silent exchange. She believed that if she kept the peace, if she was consistent, gentle, they'd never have a reason to hurt her. Warnings had come: quiet knocks, stern visits from wildlife officers, concerned neighbors. They told her feeding the animals would end badly. She smiled, listened, and carried on. In her eyes, the creatures of the woods weren't wild or dangerous. They were familiar souls, hungry and harmless, who deserved kindness. And perhaps in return, they filled the hollow place her husband once occupied. The morning was cold and clean, the air sharp with the scent of pine and damp earth. Eleanor moved through her kitchen with practiced ease, gathering oatmeal, honey, and 3 red apples into a large metal bowl, an offering for the wild visitors who had, over the years, come to trust the scent of kindness drifting from her porch. By 7:30 a.m., the sun had burned away the morning fog. Eleanor stepped onto her porch, the bowl balanced carefully in her hands. The apples gleamed under the sunlight, a small offering she intended to leave at the forest edge. She moved steadily down the steps, her small frame swallowed by the tall grass that surrounded the clearing. As she crossed the yard, she spotted a dark shape near the old cedar bird feeder, a black bear. Seeing a bear, though not daily, was not entirely rare for Eleanor. Over the past few months, she had occasionally glimpsed 1 or 2 wandering at the edge of the woods, sniffing cautiously before retreating. She always treated these sightings with a gentle awe, never fear. But this morning, something felt different. A massive black bear stood just beyond the feeder, its thick coat gleaming in the morning light. Later estimates placed him at around 350 pounds, his powerful shoulders shifting beneath glossy fur. Eleanor's heart lifted, not in fear but with a kind of tender excitement. She recognized him from previous sightings near her property, and in her mind he was simply a hungry visitor deserving of kindness. She moved closer, closing the gap to 15 feet, hoping to gently place the apples on the ground where he could find them easily. The bear's body tensed, his ears flattened, his mouth parted to reveal yellowed teeth, subtle warning signs. Signs Eleanor either didn't see or refused to acknowledge. Without a sound, the bear charged. He covered the distance between them in seconds. Rising up on his hind legs, he towered over her before lashing out with a massive paw. The swipe knocked the metal bowl from her hands, apples scattering across the dew-wet grass. It also caught Eleanor across the shoulder, slashing through the fabric of her cardigan and tearing into her flesh. She crumpled to the ground, stunned, the air knocked from her lungs. Before she could cry out, the bear's jaws clamped onto her neck and shoulder. Arteries ruptured under the crushing force. In one brutal motion, the bear dragged her a few feet toward the tree line, leaving a dark trail across the trampled grass. Across the road, Tom Harkins, a retired postal worker and longtime neighbor, was checking his mailbox when he heard a broken, desperate scream. Alarmed, he sprinted toward Eleanor's property, waving his arms and shouting to scare off whatever was there. The bear, startled by the sudden noise and movement, released Eleanor and disappeared into the dense woods, vanishing between the trees. But it was already too late. Eleanor lay motionless in the grass, her cardigan torn, the apples she had gathered just hours earlier now scattered around her like fallen offerings. The entire encounter had lasted less than 2 minutes. In the days that followed, wildlife officials set traps and installed trail cameras. The same black bear was captured on footage raiding bird feeders, unsecured trash bins, and even porches across nearby properties. Having lost his fear of humans, he was deemed a threat and euthanized. No charges were filed, no one was blamed, but the tragedy prompted a renewed push for public education around wildlife habituation, particularly among retirees living at the edge of the forest. October 12, 2015, Lake Tahoe, California. The serene mountain landscape was ablaze with autumn colors as temperatures dropped across the Sierra Nevada mountains. Nestled among towering pines stood a secluded 2-story cabin. its wooded exterior blending with the surrounding forest. The property, popular on Airbnb for its isolation, promised a peaceful retreat from urban life. Tasha Greystone, a 27-year-old graphic designer from San Francisco, had booked the cabin for a solo getaway. Colleagues described her as hard-working and creative, often pulling late nights to meet deadlines. This trip was her chance to decompress. She arrived Monday afternoon, unpacked groceries, and settled in. That evening, she prepared dinner, opened wine, and left windows cracked for mountain air, a decision that would prove fatal. Earlier that day, Tasha had hiked along the nearby Eagle Falls Trail, posting photos of the spectacular views to her social media accounts. Finally disconnecting, she wrote, unaware of the wildlife warnings posted at the trailhead. Local rangers had documented increased bear activity in the area, with 3 cabin break-ins reported in the previous week alone. The drought had pushed bears to seek alternative food sources, bringing them dangerously close to vacation properties throughout the basin. The cabin's owner, Martin Reeves, had installed bear-proof trash containers outside but failed to include proper wildlife safety instructions in the rental information. A simple reminder to close and lock all windows might have prevented what was about to unfold. Tasha's friends would later recall her love of fresh air and how she always slept with windows open, even in her San Francisco apartment. Black bears in Tahoe had been particularly active that fall. A summer drought reduced their natural food sources before hibernation. Wildlife officials had issued warnings about proper food storage, but many visitors remained unaware. Adult black bears can weigh up to 500 pounds with remarkable strength when motivated by hunger. At 2:30 in the morning, a male black bear detected food scents through the partially open kitchen window. The animal, weighing around 350 pounds, had been foraging nearby properties for weeks. It pushed the window wider and climbed inside, drawn by granola, fruit, and groceries left on the counter. The bear had developed a pattern of behavior that wildlife biologists call food conditioning, associating human structures with easy meals. This particular animal had already broken into 2 vehicles and a garage in the previous month, according to wildlife officials who later examined its DNA and tracking records. Tasha, asleep upstairs, woke to movement below. Assuming another guest, she descended to investigate. At the bottom step, she came face to face with the massive bear. The animal, startled by her sudden appearance, immediately became defensive. Tasha backed away, but the bear advanced. When she turned to flee, it lunged, striking her with its paw and sending her crashing into the dining table. The impact fractured ribs and dislocated her shoulder. As she attempted to escape, the bear bit her leg, causing severe damage and heavy bleeding. Blood pooled on the hardwood floor as the bear continued its attack. Its claws tore through her torso, causing massive internal injuries. The attack lasted several minutes as the bear mauled her repeatedly. By the time it returned to the food, Tasha had succumbed to her injuries, lying motionless beside the overturned furniture. The bear ransacked the kitchen, tearing open cabinets and refrigerator doors. It consumed nearly all available food before moving to the living room, where it destroyed furniture and personal belongings. Evidence suggested the animal remained in the cabin for several hours before finally departing through the same window it had entered. A neighbor walking his dog the next morning noticed the open window and damaged exterior, but assumed it was routine maintenance. This critical delay meant that emergency responders weren't called until hours later, though forensic analysis would later confirm that immediate medical intervention wouldn't have saved Tasha given the severity of her injuries. The property owner discovered Tasha's body the following afternoon during a maintenance check. The bear had consumed most of the food before exiting, leaving devastation behind. Wildlife officials tracked the animal using DNA evidence and euthanized it 3 days later. The incident sparked changes to Airbnb policies in wildlife-prone areas. requiring hosts to provide safety information and proper food storage. Tasha's family established a foundation to educate visitors about wildlife safety in mountain communities. Lake Tahoe authorities reported that while bear encounters were common, fatal attacks remained extremely rare, with Tasha's death being the first recorded in the region in over 2 decades. The California Department of Fish and Wildlife subsequently launched an aggressive public awareness campaign targeting vacation rental guests throughout the Sierra Nevada region. November 2, 2012 was unusually hot and dry in Nairobi, Kenya, even by local standards. The drought that had gripped the region for nearly 2 years showed no signs of breaking, leaving the landscape parched and the wildlife desperate. As night fell over the sprawling informal settlement of Mukuru kwa Njenga, the temperature remained uncomfortably high, with residents leaving windows and doors ajar in hopes of catching any stray breeze that might provide relief from the stifling heat, a necessity that some would find very dangerous. 6-year-old Isaac Mwangi was the youngest of 4 children in a family struggling to make ends meet in Mukuru. With his bright eyes and infectious laugh, he was beloved by everyone in the community. Isaac's father worked as a day laborer at construction sites around the city, while his mother sold vegetables at a small stall near their home. Their family lived in a single-room dwelling made of corrugated metal sheets, with a dirt floor and a small charcoal stove for cooking. The drought had had devastating effects on the wildlife, pushing animals to venture closer to human settlements in search of food and water. Spotted hyenas, the species common to Kenya, can hunt in packs or alone and have been known to kill animals as large as wildebeest and zebra. Their jaws are among the most powerful in the animal kingdom, with a bite force exceeding 1,100 pounds per square inch, strong enough to crush the femur of a giraffe. This extraordinary strength allows them to consume every part of their prey, including bones and hooves, leaving virtually nothing behind. On that November evening, the Mwangi family went about their usual routine. After a simple dinner, the children did their homework by the light of a kerosene lamp. As night passes, the family prepares for bed. By midnight, everyone had finally fallen into a deep sleep, exhausted from the day's work and the oppressive heat. Unknown to the sleeping family, a clan of hyenas had been spotted earlier that evening on the outskirts of Mukuru. Hyenas have an incredible sense of smell. They can detect odors from up to 4 kilometers away, and the scent of the settlement's waste and livestock has drawn them closer to human habitation than they would normally venture. Unlike many predators, hyenas are not deterred by human presence and will readily enter villages and settlements if they sense an opportunity for food. Their nocturnal habits make them particularly dangerous, as they can move through human areas under the cover of darkness. One particular hyena, an adult female estimated to weigh around 70 kilograms, had separated from the clan. Wildlife experts would later speculate that she might have been desperate to feed her cubs, as female hyenas are the dominant providers in their social structure. In hyena society, females are larger, more aggressive, and higher ranking than males, a rare characteristic in the mammal world. The hyena approached the Mwangi family's home. The drought had made food scarce, and hunger had made the animal bold. Using her powerful jaws, she began to work at the weak point where the door met the frame. Hyenas are remarkably intelligent and persistent, with problem-solving abilities that rival those of great apes. When motivated by hunger, they can be incredibly resourceful in accessing potential food sources. The sound of metal scraping against wood caused Isaac's father to stir, but before he could fully wake, the hyena had managed to create an opening large enough to squeeze through. The animal entered the dark room. Hyenas have excellent night vision, with a reflective layer behind their retinas called the tapetum lucidum that enhances their ability to see in low-light conditions. The hyena's keen nose led it directly to the sleeping children. In a split second, the hyena clamped its jaws around Isaac's head and neck. The boy barely had time to wake. His sudden scream jolted the family awake, but in the dark confusion, they couldn't immediately comprehend what was happening. They weren't aware that Isaac was already being dragged away. Isaac's mother reached frantically in the darkness where her son had been sleeping just moments before, while his father lunged toward the door, catching a glimpse of a large, hunched silhouette disappearing into the night with his son. The hyena moved with surprising speed, dragging Isaac away. Hyenas can run at speeds of up to 60 kilometers per hour over short distances, making them difficult to chase on foot. The boy's screams quickly faded as the predator carried him further from home. Isaac's father gave chase, shouting for help as he ran barefoot through the narrow pathways between homes. Neighbors emerged from their dwellings, alerted by the commotion. Some grabbed whatever weapons they could find, sticks, tools, kitchen knives, and joined the desperate search. But the hyena had already put considerable distance between itself and the pursuers. With its powerful neck and shoulders, it could easily carry the small boy. As dawn broke, a group of men who had ventured about 80 meters from the edge of the settlement made the grim discovery. Isaac's small body lay partially hidden in a patch of tall grass, his bright school uniform now torn and stained dark with blood. The hyena carried him approximately 80 meters from the home. The hyena had apparently been startled by the search party before it could consume its prey. The noise and lights from the searchers had likely interrupted this process, causing the predator to abandon its kill, a behavior that's common when hyenas are disturbed during feeding. The community was devastated. Women wailed in grief as Isaac's body was carefully wrapped in a blanket and carried back to the settlement. His parents, who had continued searching in another direction, collapsed in anguish when they received the news. Their youngest child, their beloved boy with the bright future, was gone. It was February 17, 2017, when Sarah DeClercq pulled into the steep driveway of the hillside rental home in Glencairn, Cape Town, eager for a weekend that felt stolen from time. At 39, Sarah had spent the past year locked in a relentless cycle of 12-hour days at a marketing firm, pushing projects to completion under impossible deadlines. Efficiency and control had shaped her adult life, but lately, exhaustion had begun to fray those edges. She viewed the trip as more necessary than luxury, a chance to slow down, to reset her slipping grip on balance. Her husband Johan, 42, had a quieter energy. A mechanical engineer by trade, he was patient, methodical, and slow to anger, the kind of man who could lose hours tinkering in a garage or fixing a stubborn engine. Their daughter Emma, 6 years old, was a mirror of both of them, headstrong and curious, but already burdened by an adult sense of caution she couldn't quite explain. The rental home perched high on a rugged slope overlooking False Bay, its glass walls glinting under the sun like a beacon. It had been advertised as an escape into nature, a phrase Sarah had clung to when she booked it weeks ago. She had envisioned mornings drinking coffee while waves crashed below, Emma laughing in sun-drenched rooms, Johan finally smiling without that tightness around his eyes. The Atlantic breeze climbed the hillside, salty and sharp, slipping easily through the open balcony door Sarah flung wide. The house felt alive with heat and movement, the warm air mingling with the smell of fresh paint and polished wood. Somewhere beyond the balcony, in the dense brush sloping toward the cliffs, something stirred, too large for a bird, too deliberate to be the wind. But the sound faded quickly, absorbed by the rising cicada hum. Johan lingered by the car, hauling bags inside, while Emma danced barefoot across the living room, her face tilted to the light. Inside the entryway, a small laminated sign clung to the wall. Please keep balcony doors secured, wildlife activity common. The font was faded, easy to miss amid the excitement. A crumpled local guidebook on the kitchen counter listed baboon encounters among minor tourist nuisances, tucked between parking tips and restaurant recommendations. Sarah skimmed past both, her mind already preoccupied with the cheese board she planned to assemble for lunch. The house, though stunning, lacked the hardened security common to permanent residences deeper into town. No reinforced locks, no security alarms, only a thin membrane of glass separating comfort from wilderness. For a moment, as Sarah stood alone on the deck and stared out over the bay, she felt a flicker of unease. Not fear exactly, but the distant, disquieting sense that something unseen was watching. Up on the slope above, hidden among silver trees and thick brush, a troop of Chacma baboons watched. Chacma baboons are the largest of their kind, with adult males reaching 90 pounds and capable of aggressive, highly opportunistic behavior. Native to southern Africa, they had adapted well to the spread of human settlements, learning over generations to raid homes, open windows, and snatch food from unsuspecting tourists. While generally avoiding outright confrontation, certain alpha males, particularly those scarred by years of dominance battles, exhibited bolder, more unpredictable behavior when the troop's survival demanded it. 17 strong, the troop shifted through the brush, led by a battle-worn alpha with a torn right ear. Their paths through neighborhoods had been carved over years, trails marked not by scent but by silent opportunity. An open window here, an unsecured balcony there. The scent of fruit and fresh bread spilling lazily into the afternoon air caught their attention. As late afternoon deepened, Sarah worked in the kitchen arranging crackers, cheeses, and bowls of sliced apples. Johann, exhausted from the long drive and a week of backlogged projects, stretched out upstairs on the cool bedspread, his mind drifting into half-sleep. Emma built a castle from sofa pillows and dolls, her small hands steady, her forehead creased with focus. Outside, the shadows in the brush moved closer, creeping with a patience honed by generations of practice. The first sound, a soft scrape against the wooden deck, barely registered above the sigh of shifting pillows and the creak of the house settling. The second thud, heavier and followed by Emma's sharp intake of breath, tore Sarah from her moment of calm. She crossed the living room in seconds. 3 large baboons had already breached the threshold. One clutched a half-ripped grocery bag, scattering apples across the floor. Another rifled through Emma's dolls with casual destructiveness, sending plastic limbs sprawling across the rug. The alpha male stood in the center of the chaos. Thick-shouldered and broad-chested, his amber eyes locked unblinkingly on Emma. Sarah's instinct, the same relentless need for control that had ruled her working life, surged forward. She moved immediately, positioning her body between her daughter and the intruders without hesitation. The alpha's lips peeled back in a snarl, revealing canines nearly 2 inches long. He dropped low, gathering power in his hindquarters, and charged. The first swipe tore a gash from Sarah's temple down her cheekbone, 4 nails slicing easily through skin. She staggered, momentarily stunned, but kept her ground. The second attack came faster, the alpha's jaws locking onto the side of her neck with brutal precision, the puncture tearing deep into the arteries beneath. Sarah crumpled onto the hardwood floor, her body folding instinctively around Emma as blood surged outward in dark rivers. Upstairs, Johann jolted awake, confusion giving way to a lurching panic at the sounds below. He barreled down the staircase, heart hammering against his ribs, and charged into the living room. The scene unraveled in an instant. Overturned furniture, shattered glass, Sarah lying prone in a widening pool of blood. Roaring and flailing, Johann drove the baboons back, the troop scattering out the balcony doors in a chaotic retreat, fruit and torn fabric clutched in retreating fists. Johann fell to his knees beside Sarah, pressing towels ripped from the kitchen drawer against her neck. His hands slipped across the blood-slicked fabric, fumbling with his phone, his voice breaking as he called for help. Paramedics arrived within 12 minutes. They stabilized what they could, loading Sarah onto a stretcher with mechanical urgency. Despite every effort during the 30-minute drive to Groot Schuur Hospital, the damage was too severe. Sarah DeClercq was pronounced dead upon arrival. In the aftermath, Glencairn's quiet community reeled. Local authorities fined the rental agency for failing to implement required baboon-proofing measures, including new mandates for reinforced doors, alarms, and visible wildlife hazard signs for all short-term properties. The DeClercq story circulated quickly among locals. It wasn't just the horror of what had happened, but the familiarity of it. The open balcony doors, the careless forgetting of warnings, the illusion that nature, no matter how close, would stay politely at a distance. For Johann, the trip was meant to bring rest and had become a fracture that no amount of time would repair. For Emma, the childhood shaped by cautiousness hardened into something permanent, though no words would ever capture the moment she lost more than she could fully comprehend. August 3, 2019. The northwestern edge of Houston, Texas was experiencing one of the most severe summer droughts in recent memory. The once flowing creeks that sustained local wildlife had dried to dusty channels, forcing animals to venture deeper into suburban areas in search of water and food. The Melrose family's neighborhood sat precariously on this urban wilderness boundary, with undeveloped woodlots and green belts providing perfect corridors for wildlife to infiltrate residential areas. The Melrose family had moved to this quiet suburban development just 6 months earlier, attracted by the spacious yards and proximity to nature. Their backyard backed up against one of these wooded areas, which they initially saw as a feature rather than a threat. 4-year-old Jordan was a curious, energetic boy who loved exploring the outdoors. His parents had installed a swing set and sandbox where he spent hours playing, always under the watchful eye of his mother or father. In the weeks leading up to that fateful Saturday, residents had reported increased coyote sightings in the neighborhood. Local wildlife officials had issued warnings about keeping small pets indoors and securing trash cans, but no aggressive encounters had been reported. The drought had made these normally shy animals bolder in their search for food and water, but they typically avoided human contact. That evening, as the Texas heat began to subside with the setting sun, the Melrose family was enjoying a typical weekend at home. Jordan's mother was preparing dinner, occasionally checking on her son through the kitchen window as he played with his toys in the backyard. Jordan's father had gone to pick up some groceries, leaving mother and son at home. The family's small dog Pepper was inside the house, barking occasionally at something unseen beyond the fence. What the family didn't realize was that a young male coyote had been frequenting their neighborhood for weeks. Unlike most of its kind, this particular animal had become habituated to human presence through inadvertent feeding. Neighbors had left pet food outside, and unsecured garbage had provided easy meals. Wildlife biologists would later suspect the animal might have been suffering from an early stage of rabies, explaining its uncharacteristically bold behavior. At approximately 6:45 in the evening, Jordan's mother stepped away from the window briefly to answer a phone call. She could still hear her son talking to himself as he played, a reassuring sound that suddenly transformed into a terrified scream. Dropping the phone, she rushed to the back door. The coyote had slipped through a small gap in the fence where it met the ground near the wooded area. Initially, it had approached cautiously, perhaps drawn by the child's small stature and rapid movements, which triggered its predatory instinct. When Jordan spotted the animal and tried to run toward the house, the coyote lunged forward, knocking the boy to the ground. By the time Jordan's mother reached the yard, the coyote had bitten her son multiple times on his arms and neck. The animal, startled by the mother's screams and approach, backed away momentarily but didn't flee. Instead, it circled aggressively, showing none of the fear of humans typical of healthy coyotes. The mother grabbed a nearby garden tool and swung it wildly at the animal, finally driving it back toward the fence gap. As the coyote retreated, the mother scooped up her severely injured son and ran inside, locking the door behind them. Blood soaked through Jordan's t-shirt from multiple puncture wounds. She immediately called 911, desperately trying to stop the bleeding while waiting for emergency services to arrive. Paramedics reached the home within minutes, but Jordan had already lost a dangerous amount of blood from a bite that severed his carotid artery. Despite their best efforts to stabilize him during the rush journey to the hospital, the 4-year-old was pronounced dead shortly after arrival at the emergency room. The community was stunned by the tragedy. Wildlife officials set traps in the area and within 2 days captured a visibly unhealthy male coyote matching the mother's description. Testing confirmed the animal was in the early stages of rabies, explaining its abnormally aggressive behavior. The incident was classified as an extraordinarily rare predatory attack, one of only a handful of fatal coyote incidents ever recorded in North America. In the aftermath, the neighborhood underwent significant changes. The Homeowners Association implemented new fencing requirements, ensuring no gaps existed that could allow wildlife to enter yards. The city launched an aggressive wildlife management program and educational campaign about safely coexisting with urban wildlife. Residents were instructed never to feed wildlife even inadvertently, and to report any animals showing unusual behavior immediately. For the Melrose family, no measure could undo their loss. They eventually relocated, unable to remain in a home haunted by such tragedy. A small memorial garden was planted in the neighborhood park, where a plaque bearing Jordan's name reminds residents of the rare but real dangers that can emerge when human development encroaches on wildlife habitat, and of a little boy whose life was cut tragically short by an extraordinary confluence of unfortunate circumstances. The incident stands as a sobering reminder that while fatal wildlife attacks in urban settings are extremely rare, the combination of drought, habitat loss, and habituation to humans can occasionally lead to devastating consequences, forever changing the lives of those involved. Jordan's story reminds us that even suburban fences can't always keep nature at bay. August 18, 2011 dawned crisp and clear in Boulder, Colorado, with the promise of another beautiful summer day. The morning air carried a slight chill that would soon give way to warmth. Ideal conditions for hiking, climbing, or in Avery Flint's case, running. Avery was a 17-year-old high school student with her whole life ahead of her. She was known throughout Boulder High School as one of their most promising long-distance runners. Running wasn't just a sport for Avery, it was her passion, her meditation, and her way of connecting with the natural world around her. Every morning, rain or shine, Avery would lace up her running shoes and hit the trails before most people had even poured their first cup of coffee. She had a passion for running, joining competitions and events. Her parents, both working professionals, had initially been concerned about her running alone, but had grown comfortable with her routine over time. That morning began like any other summer day for Avery. She woke up at 6:30 a.m. After a quick breakfast of toast and a banana, she headed out the door, telling her mother she'd be back in an hour. The Chautauqua Park Trail was her chosen route that day, a path she'd run countless times before. The trail was quiet that morning, with only a few early hikers nodding hello as they passed. As Avery entered a more wooded section of the trail, she fully immersed in her running, listening to music, completely unaware of the dangers lurking. Due to her running alone in the forest, she unknowingly attracted a mountain lion with her loud running, cautiously following her, hiding in a small cliff near her. These solitary predators are masters of stealth, with specially adapted retractable claws that allow them to move silently through their territory. Their tan coats blend perfectly with the rocky terrain of Colorado's foothills, making them nearly invisible when stationary. Mountain lions typically avoid humans, but certain factors, hunger, territorial instincts, or the protection of young, can occasionally lead to attacks. In this case, the mountain lion may have perceived Avery's running motion as prey-like behavior, triggering its hunting instinct. Wildlife biologists note that running activates a mountain lion's chase response, as the movement mimics that of fleeing prey. The attack came without warning. As Avery rounded a bend in the trail, the mountain lion pounced from above, landing squarely on her back with devastating force. Mountain lions can leap up to 40 feet horizontally and 15 feet vertically, making their ambush attacks nearly impossible to defend against. The impact knocked her face first onto the dirt path, the weight of the 130-pound cat driving the air from her lungs. The mountain lion had clamped its powerful jaws around the back of her neck. The initial bite was strong enough to sever the spinal cord, a killing technique perfected over millennia of evolution. Mountain lions have specialized carcanial teeth that act like scissors, targeting the neck of prey, are remarkably efficient, and typically result in a quick death. A medical examiner confirmed that Avery's body went limp almost immediately as the cat's canine teeth penetrated deep into her neck. With its prey now subdued, the mountain lion began to drag Avery's body off the main trail and into the underbrush. This behavior is typical of large cats who prefer to feed in seclusion, away from potential threats or competition. Avery is now food for the mountain lion. 2 hours later, a hiker veered slightly off the main trail to photograph a patch of wildflowers. Instead, he made the gruesome discovery of Avery's partially covered body. The hiker, with shaking hands, called 911, reporting the location and the nature of what he had found. The mountain lion dragged her approximately 100 feet from the trail into a dense thicket where it began to cover her body with leaves and debris, a behavior known as caching. This instinctive action helps hide the kill from scavengers and other predators, allowing the mountain lion to return over the next several days to feed, rather than consuming the entire prey at once. The response was swift. Boulder County Sheriff's deputies, park rangers, and emergency medical personnel converged on the scene. The medical examiner later confirmed what was already apparent. Avery had died from catastrophic injuries to her neck and spine. The attack pattern was unmistakably that of a mountain lion. Wildlife experts later determined that she likely lost consciousness within seconds of the initial strike, sparing her from experiencing the full horror of what followed. Colorado Parks and Wildlife officials immediately launched a search for the responsible animal. Using tracking dogs and following the trail of disturbed vegetation, they located the mountain lion later that day, approximately half a mile from where Avery's body had been found. The decision was made to euthanize the animal, both to prevent further attacks and to test it for diseases that might have contributed to its unusual behavior. It was October 15, 2010, when Elias Banda rose before the first light touched the streets of Livingston. At 52, he had spent most of his life working with wood. Years of carving had left his fingers thick with calluses and lined with cuts that never fully healed. A quiet and disciplined man, Elias worked without waste or rush. He approached each day the same way he approached each piece of timber, with patience and precision. He spoke little, but when he did, it was to explain a process or recite a story from long ago. His son Muteli, 17, had inherited his father's mannerisms. He was observant, soft-spoken, and methodical, rarely acting without prompting. Since dropping out of high school earlier that year due to financial constraints, he had been working alongside his father full-time. He was still learning to carve, but he handled the market stall with care. Unlike many boys his age, he had learned to keep still, to listen before speaking, and to study every movement before making one himself. That morning, Elias selected carvings with practiced intent: giraffes, lions, and several elephants in various poses. He set aside one unfinished piece, a stylized elephant with a lowered head and flared ears. The wood grain still rough, the expression partially shaped, the figure rested on the corner table of the workshop. Mutale packed the finished figures into a canvas sack while Elias double-checked their tools. They left the house just after 6 a.m., walking the mile-long route to Mukuni Market on foot. The streets were still cooling from the night. Cooking fires were started, and the scent of charcoal mingled with early traffic fumes. The city had been busy in recent weeks. New construction projects had drawn attention, including a large hotel underway on the western side. Locals had discussed it casually, mostly in terms of job opportunities and the dust it kicked up. Wildlife officials, however, had been monitoring changes more closely. Approximately 3 miles from the city center, a 15-acre section of woodland had been cleared. Rangers reported disrupted elephant paths and sightings near farms and residential edges. One bull elephant had been spotted several times in recent days. Estimated to be around 15 years old and weighing close to 6,000 pounds, it had been observed alone, ears flared, tail raised, moving unpredictably and showing signs of stress. The animal had a small notch missing from its left ear and a faded patch across its flank, likely from rubbing against fencing or bark. At the market, the day moved easily. Mukuni Market was a tight grid of stalls no more than 12 feet across in most places, shaded by canvas and plastic sheeting. Elias' stall sat near the southern corridor, surrounded by woven baskets, chitenge cloth, and soapstone trinkets. His wooden animals, each sanded and shaped with precision, were laid in rows. His elephants were the most detailed. Tourists often paused to admire them, drawn by Elias's quiet demeanor and the clean, balanced symmetry of his work. By 3 p.m., a cultural group began setting up near the east entrance. Drummers, food vendors, and singers gathered, attracting a larger crowd than usual. Elias, who normally packed up before sundown, chose to stay late. It had been a productive day, and he'd promised to let Mutale finish setting prices on the newer carvings. Several tourists still lingered, asking about the prices and taking photos. Music played through a static-ridden speaker near the entrance. The smell of roasting maize, dust, and oil from passing minibuses lingered in the air. Around 6:40 p.m., nearby vendors noticed movement beyond the west corridor. A few stray dogs had retreated suddenly from a side street. Some vendors paused, their attention drawn by the strange quiet that followed. Music still played, but muffled now as if filtered through fog. A low, rhythmic sound grew louder, not the steady beat of drums, but something heavier, each impact like a hammer on dry earth. A shopkeeper near the northwest fence stepped into the path between stalls and froze. He turned sharply, shouted something, and vanished into the crowd. At approximately 6:45 p.m., the elephant emerged from a narrow access road behind a row of closed kiosks. Witnesses described its ears spread wide, tail lifted, trunk raised and swinging. Its pace was deliberate, head high, legs stiff. Dust coated its shoulders. Its eyes reflected the dull yellow of the market's streetlights. The elephant stood at the market's outer boundary for a few seconds, nostrils flaring. Then it stepped forward, slow at first, then accelerating down the corridor. What followed was a chain of reactions compressed into seconds. Vendors dropped boxes, tables overturned. A plastic bucket clattered across the cement. Screams pierced the air, some too late. The market's narrow geometry turned confusion into entrapment. Some tried to duck under stalls, others ran into each other or slipped on tarps and dropped merchandise. Elias was at the far end of the corridor behind his table. He had just handed off a giraffe carving to a tourist and turned to reach for twine when the screaming reached him. He looked up and saw the elephant less than 30 feet away, advancing through smoke and shadows. The market around him fractured, stalls collapsing, fabric tearing, people running. But his exit was blocked on 3 sides. He moved to the left toward a support beam and stack of crates. The elephant reached him in moments. A front leg struck Elias in the chest, driving him backward into the stone divider behind his stall. The impact broke part of the table frame. Several wooden figures scattered beneath him. One tusk scraped the edge of the canopy post before the animal continued forward, turning sharply at the next junction. The chaos ended as quickly as it had begun. The elephant moved through the north corridor and disappeared into the dark. It was last seen crossing into the Dambois outskirts, approximately 1.2 miles away. No other serious injuries were reported. Mutale and several nearby vendors reached Elias immediately. His injuries were critical. A private vehicle transported him to Livingston General Hospital. According to hospital records, Elias Banda was pronounced dead on arrival. In the days following the incident, Zambia's Department of National Parks and Wildlife tracked the elephant using recent sighting data and spoor. The animal was found and safely relocated 150 miles north to a remote section of Kafue National Park. Municipal authorities and conservation partners initiated a review of building permits and land use planning along known wildlife corridors. Emergency response measures were expanded to include mobile ranger patrols, increased night lighting, and temporary barriers along key wildlife paths. At Mukuni Market, Elias's stall remained undisturbed for several weeks. A carved wooden elephant with lowered ears and unfinished grain was placed on the central table. By December, Mutale reopened the stall using his father's tools and layout. He continued carving with steady, practiced movements, mirroring what he had learned without altering what remained. As the dry season deepened and the tourist crowds returned, the market adjusted. Vendors began closing earlier. Signs warning of wildlife movement were posted near service roads, and though noise, music, and trade returned to their usual place, the space where Elias once stood carried a quiet presence. October 12, 2022. In the remote wilderness of Banff National Park, Canada, the crisp autumn air carried the scent of pine and the promise of adventure. The Canadian Rockies stood majestically against the darkening sky as Shauna Behringer, a 31-year-old nature photographer from Vancouver, pitched her tent just outside the monitored camping zone. Her partner Alex helped secure their temporary home for the night, unaware that this decision would lead to tragedy. Shauna had built her reputation capturing the raw beauty of North America's wildlife. Her Instagram portfolio showcased breathtaking shots of wolves, moose, and bears in their natural habitats. This particular trip to Banff was meant to add stunning fall foliage and wildlife images to her growing collection. The couple had deliberately chosen a spot away from the crowded, designated camping areas, seeking solitude and authentic wilderness experiences. Park rangers had posted numerous warning signs about proper food storage in bear country, but in their haste to set up camp before nightfall, Shauna and Alex made a fatal error. Several protein bars, trail mix, and scented toiletries remained inside their tent, a decision that violated park regulations and would soon attract unwanted attention. Food-conditioned bears had been increasingly approaching the Banff area in recent months. Wildlife officials had documented multiple incidents of bears raiding improperly secured campsites, though no attacks had occurred. The area where Shauna chose to camp had seen 3 bear sightings in the previous week alone. Local rangers had even placed additional warning signs at trailheads, but the couple had arrived after dark and missed these crucial alerts. Grizzly bears in the Banff region typically weigh between 300 to 700 pounds, with males being larger than females. These powerful omnivores possess incredible strength and a sense of smell that can detect food from over a mile away. By late autumn, grizzlies enter hyperphagia, an intense feeding period where they consume thousands of calories daily to prepare for winter hibernation. Their normally cautious nature around humans can be overridden by hunger as winter approaches. At approximately 2:13 in the morning, as the couple slept soundly in their tent, a male grizzly that had previously been hazed by park officials detected the scent of food. The bear, identified later as Bear 164, had been pushed toward human settlements due to territorial disputes with other males and the lure of easy meals. Fresh paw prints discovered the next day showed it had circled the tent several times before making its move. The first indication of danger came as a low, huffing sound outside the tent. Shauna stirred from her sleep, nudging Alex awake. Before either could react, the fabric of their tent ripped open with a violent tearing sound as the grizzly's powerful claws shredded through the nylon material. In the darkness, illuminated only by the beam of a hastily grabbed flashlight, the massive silhouette of the bear loomed over them. The grizzly lunged forward, its jaws clamping down on Shauna's shoulder. Her collarbone shattered as the bear's teeth penetrated deep into muscle tissue. Alex scrambled backward toward the tent opening, screaming for help. The bear, focused entirely on Shauna, dragged her from the sleeping bag. Its claws raked across her torso, causing severe lacerations. Blood saturated the tent floor as Shauna fought desperately, striking at the bear's face. The grizzly responded by shaking her violently, causing catastrophic internal injuries. Within moments, Shauna lost consciousness from the massive blood loss and trauma. Alex managed to escape the tent and climb a nearby tree, where he watched in horror as the bear dragged Shauna's body several meters from the campsite. The grizzly continued to maul her before beginning to feed. Park rangers and emergency responders arrived at the remote location hours later, finding Alex still in the tree, suffering from hypothermia and shock. Shauna's body was recovered the following morning, after the bear had left the area. An investigation revealed that Bear 164 had been previously identified as a problem bear that had been hazed away from campgrounds on multiple occasions but never relocated. Following the attack, wildlife officials tracked the grizzly using DNA evidence from the scene and euthanized it 3 days later. The fatal encounter became the first documented grizzly-caused human death in Banff in over a decade, prompting wildlife officials to review their bear management protocols. Local guides reported a noticeable increase in visitors requesting bear safety information in the months following Shauna's death. March 14, 2016 began as a mild spring day in Cherry Hill, New Jersey. The morning frost had given way to sunshine. By late afternoon, the temperature had climbed into the low 60s. Prompting many residents to open windows and spend time outdoors after the long winter months. Martin Delano was an 81-year-old retired high school history teacher who had lived in the same Cherry Hill home for over 4 decades. Martin lived alone except for his beloved golden retriever, Rusty. Despite his age, Martin maintained an active lifestyle. Neighbors often saw him chatting with fellow dog walkers or helping younger families with historical research for their children's school projects. His gentle demeanor and encyclopedic knowledge made him a beloved figure in the community. That particular day, Martin had spent the morning and early afternoon volunteering at the library. He returned home ready for his evening ritual with Rusty. As usual, he filled Rusty's bowl on the back porch while the dog waited patiently. What Martin didn't know was that a raccoon had been frequenting his neighborhood for several days, exhibiting behavior that concerned some residents. Normally nocturnal creatures, this particular raccoon had been spotted during daylight hours, appearing disoriented and unusually aggressive. Raccoons are common throughout North America and are highly adaptable to urban and suburban environments. These intelligent omnivores have dexterous front paws with 5 fingers each, allowing them to open garbage cans, unscrew jars, and manipulate complex objects. While generally not dangerous to humans, they can carry several diseases, most notably rabies. As Martin bent down to place Rusty's bowl on the porch, he saw a medium-sized raccoon approaching from the corner of the yard. The animal moved with an unsteady gait, its fur matted and disheveled. Martin straightened up slowly, not wanting to startle the creature, and placed a protective hand on Rusty's collar. The raccoon stopped momentarily, swaying slightly as it seemed to assess the situation. Then, without warning, it charged forward with surprising speed. Before Martin could react, the raccoon had lunged at him, latching onto his right hand with its teeth and claws. The initial bite was painful, causing Martin to cry out in surprise. Rusty barked frantically, but the elderly dog was too well trained to attack without command. Martin tried to shake the raccoon off, but it held firm, its teeth penetrating the skin between his thumb and forefinger. Raccoons have sharp, pointed teeth designed for their omnivorous diet, capable of tearing flesh and causing puncture wounds rather than the large lacerations that might come from larger predators. Martin shouted and swung his arm in an attempt to dislodge the animal. Animals infected with rabies often exhibit what's called furious rabies, characterized by increased aggression and a complete lack of fear, behaviors that would normally be suppressed in healthy wild animals. With his free hand, Martin managed to reach for a broom that was leaning against the porch railing. He swung it at the raccoon, striking it hard enough to finally break its grip on his arm. The animal fell to the porch floor but immediately turned to attack again, its eyes wild and mouth foaming slightly. Excessive salivation or foaming at the mouth is one of the classic symptoms of rabies, caused by the virus's effect on the salivary glands and the animal's inability to swallow normally. Martin used the broom to keep the raccoon at bay, jabbing at it repeatedly until it finally retreated, disappearing under a gap in the fence. Shaking and in shock, Martin stumbled into his kitchen, where he ran cold water over his bleeding wounds. Rusty whined anxiously at his feet, sensing his owner's distress. A neighbor who had heard the commotion came to check on Martin and was alarmed by the bite wounds. Despite Martin's protest that he was fine, she insisted on driving him to the emergency room. It was at this critical junction that Martin made a decision that would ultimately cost him his life. A deeply religious man with some unconventional beliefs about medicine, Martin refused the rabies treatment. Despite the doctor's warnings about the seriousness of rabies and the urgency of beginning treatment, Martin insisted that he would be fine with just antibiotics for the wound infection. The medical staff documented his refusal of treatment and provided him with information about rabies symptoms, urging him to return immediately if he experienced any unusual sensations, difficulty swallowing, confusion, or agitation. Martin nodded politely but remained firm in his decision. He went back home and everything was fine until about 3 weeks after the incident. Concerned neighbors who hadn't seen Martin walking Rusty for several days checked on him and found him confused and agitated. When he told them about his symptoms and admitted that water caused him painful throat spasms when he tried to drink, they immediately called an ambulance. By the time Martin arrived at the hospital, he was in the advanced stages of rabies. His confusion had progressed to delirium, with periods of extreme agitation alternating with paralysis. This phase, known as furious rabies, is characterized by hyperactivity, confusion, hallucinations, and aggressive behavior. Martin's condition deteriorated rapidly. 7 days after the onset of symptoms, Martin Delano died from rabies. Martin's dog Rusty was taken in by a former student of his who lived nearby. Because Rusty's rabies vaccinations were up to date, he did not develop the disease, though he was kept under observation for several months as a precaution. Domestic animals like dogs and cats serve as an important buffer between wildlife rabies and humans, which is why rabies vaccination is required by law in most jurisdictions. It was August 12, 2011 when Tesfaye Mekanen and his older brother Dawit set out from their small corrugated metal home on the outskirts of Addis Ababa. The sun had barely dipped behind the low hills, casting long shadows over the battered landscape. Already the cicadas had quieted. In the distance, the dump smoldered under its own weight, a dull haze rising into the cooling air. At 13, Tesfaye was slight and wiry, standing just 4 feet 9 inches tall, his frame shaped by years of hunger and hard living. Dawit, 15, carried the same marks of survival: calloused hands, sun-creased skin, and a wary way of moving through the world. Together they wore the tired determination of those who had never known an easy life, each night a calculation between risk and necessity. Since their father's death from tuberculosis 3 years earlier, the brothers had scavenged Koshi Dump nearly every night. Their mother, a laundress, struggled to stretch her meager earnings, and the boys' haul of metal, plastic, and glass often spelled the difference between eating and going without. Hunger had a way of pushing caution aside when there were no other options. Koshi, Dirty, and Amharic sprawled across 74 acres, a landscape of shifting garbage mountains that rose up to 40 feet high. It stank of rot and smoke, the air always thick with the buzz of flies and the slow-burning reek of decomposing waste. By day, the dump teemed with scavengers. By night, it grew eerily still, the silence broken only by the rustling of rats and the low rumble of unseen diesel trucks. Lately, though, something else had crept into the uneasy quiet. For weeks, whispers had traveled through the dump about the hyenas. Bigger and bolder than before, waste pickers spoke of glowing eyes glimpsed at the edges of the trash fields, of shadows slipping between mounds when flashlights sputtered low. Some claim they had seen dark shapes watching from the perimeter when the fires burned down. Officials shrugged off the warnings. Wild animals were part of life near the city's edge, and there were too few resources to respond to every rumor. Still, that night as Tesfaye and Dawit trudged through the western section of the dump, each boy kept a hand close to the battered hooks they carried. They knew it was dangerous to be out there after dark, but they needed the money too badly to turn back. Their flashlights, already weak, sent trembling beams across the trash hills, illuminating broken bottles, sagging plastic, and rusting metal that shimmered faintly under the sickle moon. The dump smelled different near the edges, more earthy, more alive. The breeze carried not just the heavy odors of decay, but something sharper, something musky and wrong. Dawit muttered that they should stay close, but the hunger in their bellies pushed them forward. Opportunity and danger often lay side by side in Koshi, and for boys like them, hesitation meant going home empty-handed. By 10:15 p.m., their burlap sacks bulged with nearly 12 pounds of scrap metal, a haul worth about $9. Enough for flour, a little oil, maybe even some vegetables. Enough to keep the worst kind of hunger at bay, if only for a few days. Then Tesfaye saw it. The broken frame of a bicycle, half buried under light plastic bags, lay about 60 yards away near the perimeter fence. Bicycle parts always sold quickly. Excitement flickered through him, a reflex more powerful than caution, and he moved toward it without thinking, weaving between the trash hills with practiced speed. Behind him, Dawit crouched low over a tangle of copper wire, his focus narrowed by habit and exhaustion. He barely noticed his brother slipping away. The air grew colder near the dump's boundary. The grass beyond the last garbage mound whispered in the breeze, and somewhere just out of sight, something shifted against the darkness. Tesfaye's flashlight flickered, its beam shuddering and fading as he bent to tug at the twisted bicycle frame. The world seemed to tighten around him, the smell of the garbage giving way to the raw iron scent of earth. That was when DeWitt heard it, a sharp, high scream that tore through the heavy air. He looked up, heart hammering against his ribs. Another scream, weaker and choked, echoed across the dump. DeWitt bolted toward the sound, stumbling over heaps of refuse, his flashlight swinging wildly. In the confusion, he veered the wrong way, his boots slipping on wet plastic, his voice breaking as he called his brother's name into the vast, indifferent dark. By the time other waste pickers, roused by the noise, joined the frantic search, the trail had already gone cold. Near the far boundary, they found only Tesfai's dropped burlap sack and a single worn sandal lying in the dirt. No blood, no clear tracks. Just the sick certainty heavy in their chests that something powerful and patient had taken him. The men fanned out, their flashlight beams slicing through the trash fields, cutting thin tunnels through the damp, clinging darkness. They searched until the eastern sky grew pale. It wasn't until dawn that they found him. Tesfai's remains lay partially buried beneath a mound of garbage, hidden in a shallow depression between two trash hills about 100 yards from where he had been last seen. Deep puncture wounds in his neck and ribs left no doubt. The hyenas had struck swiftly, dragging him into the shadows, silencing him in moments. The city moved to act in the aftermath. Traps were set, hunters were hired, officials spoke of safety measures and wildlife control, but the promises came too late. Tesfai's mother, already bowed by loss and hardship, fell ill from grief and could not work for weeks. DeWitt, burdened by the guilt that never loosened its grip, abandoned scavenging entirely. The place where the brothers had once found scraps of survival had become a graveyard. And for DeWitt, every night sky seemed to echo with the faint, terrible sound of a scream that never should have gone unanswered. Thanks for watching this compilation. Not done watching yet? Click on the next video right now.